For any fighter in UFC 5, their unique style can be broadly distilled into three categories: attributes, moves, and perks. Of these three, perks are the least important, in my view, but probably the most extensive. There are dozens of perks in the game, and most of them are poorly explained. Attributes and moves are the meat and potatoes. Perks are more like spices, less important, but they still play a role in determining the overall flavor of a fighter. I'll explain the effects of each perk in the game, to the best of my knowledge. I'll also cover the costs in online career mode, and for each perk, I'll give you my general review for how effective they are. Looking at a perk will give you a rough explanation of what it does, but those looking for precise numbers are a little bit out of luck. There is no in-game or official explanation for the precise numerical values of each perk. Now, the closest thing I can find is a Romero 17 video for the perks in UFC 4. The perks seem to be exactly the same between 4 and 5, so I think these are useful numbers to go with. Romero's a top player, and he's got a direct line to the developers as a game changer, so I take his information to be accurate on all things UFC 5. With a couple of exceptions, each perk functions by boosting certain attributes under certain conditions. Fast Hands, for example, boosts accuracy and speed for punches, but only for hooks, uppercuts, and overhands. Every perk that works this way boosts the attribute by between 3 and 6 points. 3 points is the equivalent of half a star, 6 a full star. We'll start with striking perks. Now, for each perk, I'll describe the effects of the perk, the cost for online career mode, as well as any other prerequisites. I'll also mention which attributes have their higher levels unlocked by a particular perk. This is important, as some perks may be lackluster, but necessary to level up a certain attribute, like the Bulldog perk with Chin. Lastly, I'll give my overall rating for the perk. We'll keep it simple: good, average, poor. Of course, your mileage may vary. I'll also distinguish between the perk's value for online career and ranked mode separately if the cost for the perk is too high in online career, even if the perk itself may be really great when you use it with a real fighter in ranked. Our first perk is Bulldog. It costs 40 evolution points and requires cut resistance of 3 stars, which is easy to get. Bulldog gives +5 to your blocking stat whenever you're standing still or moving forwards. It's a prerequisite in order to get your chin stat up to 4 stars. Bulldog, I would say, is a good perk, both in ranked and online career. In online career, it's almost mandatory. In order to get your chin up to a higher rating, you have to have Bulldog. Chin is one of the most important stats. Almost everyone's going to want it above 3.5 stars. You can survive at 3.5, but most people, especially on high prestige, are going to want more. So Bulldog, necessary, in my view. Crazy Legs requires 50 evolution points, as well as 3 stars in leg strength. Crazy Legs offers +5 to roundhouse and switch kick, speed, and accuracy, and is required in order to get 5-star kick power. I would say that Crazy Legs is just an okay perk. Roundhouse kicks are good. That's the most common type of kick you're going to be throwing, but kicking itself is not the most important aspect of UFC 5. And you have limited perk slots, keep in mind, but the cost is not prohibitive. It's not really necessary to get to a key attribute point. Most people are never going to go to 5 stars on kick power. But for both ranked and online career, I would say it's a okay perk. Fast Hands provides +4 to speed and accuracy on hooks, uppercuts, and overhands, the shorter punches, and is required in order to get punch speed up to 5 stars. Fast Hands is a good perk, both for online career and for ranked. It's one of the most important offensive perks in the game. It boosts half your punches to a great degree. No-brainer, really. Frontal Assault requires 20 Evo points. It has no requirements, nor does it unlock anything for you. Frontal Assault gives you +5 to speed and accuracy on front kicks. This is just an okay perk. Front kicks can be a very useful weapon to use, but you're not going to win the fight by themselves in most cases. It's pretty cheap in online career, but it doesn't really unlock anything important to you. There are better perks out there, but it is inexpensive and easy to get, so that's something in its favor. Laser Focus costs 50 evolution points, It requires a level 4 straight and level 4 jab. Please note that you need a baseline jab and straight animation to get this. If you choose an alternate animation for your jab or straight, like the looping cross, those will not count for the purpose of unlocking this perk. Laser focus gives +4 to your straights, jabs, Superman, and spinning punches, and is required to unlock 5-star punch power. Laser focus is a straightforward, great perk. Boxing is the most important aspect of striking, and this will boost about half your punches. It's up to personal preference whether you want laser focus or fast hands or both. Pay to miss requires 100 evolution points. It also requires all stand-up attributes to be at 3 stars. It gives +4 to head movement while standing still or moving forwards, and it is required for 5-star head movement. This is a case where it differs based on online career versus ranked mode. In online career, I would say this is a poor perk because of its cost. 100 Evo points is a lot. Your last perk can cost 100 and put you over the limit, but there's probably multiple 100-point perks you might like. This one just doesn't do enough. It's just a half-star to head movement for 100. In ranked mode, I would say this is an average perk. It's solid. Head movement is useful for countering. Fine, but probably not the most essential. Predator requires 40 Evo points. It requires 3 stars in footwork. It provides +4 to movement when advancing or moving sideways, and it's necessary for punch power to reach 4 stars. Predator, I would say, overall, for online career, it becomes a good perk only because of its prerequisite to get to the 4-star of punch power. If it was 5-star punch power, I would probably say it's a poor perk, but many boxing builds are going to want high punch power, and this is mandatory in order to achieve it. Otherwise, in ranked, I would say this is actually a poor perk because movement speed is very important. Footwork matters a great deal, but it's more for moving side to side, which this does affect, but more for backing up, being able to get away from your opponent. You're rarely advancing as fast as you possibly can towards your opponent. It does provide a little bit of value for closing the distance, but in general, you're going to be using some hesitation to close distance rather than just charging straight at them like a boar. So I would say for ranked, it's a poor perk. For online career, it happens to be great only because it's a requirement for punch power. Razor Wire costs 20 evolution points. It requires 3-star clinch striking and provides +5 to speed and accuracy on knees and elbows from standing position, not the clinch. I would say overall, this is a poor perk, simply because while knees and elbows have situational uses, you're going to be using them way less than your other punches. Your mileage may vary. Skirmisher costs 20 evolution points, requires 4 stars in switch stance. It provides +4 to footwork when moving backwards, and is a requirement for 5-star footwork. In ranked mode, I consider this to be a very good perk. In online career, because you need perks that unlock crucial attribute breakpoints, this I think is just an okay perk. The other problem with it is that it requires 4 stars in switch stance. Most players do not want to invest in switch stance because they don't switch stances very often. If you do, this perk becomes probably good instead of just average. But speed when backing up is very important. It will help you avoid a lot of strikes and a lot of takedowns just by moving backwards, which is very useful. Steel checks requires 40 evolution points. It also requires 3 stars in leg strength, but it does not unlock anything. Steel checks is one of 2 perks that do not function by giving you a bonus to your attributes. Instead, steel checks gives you 10% more damage to your opponent when you check their leg kick. Steel checks for online career and ranked is a very poor perk. This is because you cannot compel your opponent to kick your legs, which is the only way that this will come up. There are simply better perks out there. Taekwondo costs 20 evolution points, has no unlock requirements, and is needed in order to get kick speed to 5 stars. Taekwondo provides +5 to speed and accuracy for spinning kicks. For most people, this is going to be a poor perk, but for some, and you know who you are, this will be quite good. If you're addicted to spinning shit, then this is a fairly cheap perk in order to boost some of the stuff you do. But in general, spinning kicks are more of a dessert kick and not so much a meat and potatoes kick, which is the roundhouse, or perhaps front kicks. Untouchable requires 20 Evo points, requires 3-star head movement, and does not unlock any attributes. Untouchable provides +4 to head movement while moving backwards or sideways. This is a poor perk. It does not do enough. While head movement is a good stat, head movement is usually used while the feet are planted. It's not a useless perk, it's simply the case that other perks do more for you. Weathering Storms requires 40 evolution points, as well as 3 stars in blocking. It unlocks no attributes. Weathering Storms provides +5 to your block attribute while moving backwards or sideways. Now for ranked mode, I would say this is a good perk. More block is always useful while backing up. That's often when you'll be blocking. For online career, it's merely okay, and the reason is it just doesn't unlock anything. You'll often need to spend your perks on things that unlock more attributes. This is a good perk, but it doesn't do that. So it's just okay, but it's definitely still useful. Crafty requires 20 evolution points, as well as 3 stars in submission defense. It is required to unlock 5 stars in bottom game. Crafty provides +6 to submission defense when on the bottom. I would say that for both ranked mode and online career, it's an okay perk. It will help you substantially if you're really worried about getting submitted on the bottom. The only problem is that it takes up a perk slot and it's a conditional defensive perk, which means that you're going to be missing out a little bit on perks that help you expand the focus of your game. But if you are needing to unlock higher level bottom game, then this is a decent enough perk. Like Glue, requires 10 Evo points, has no other prerequisites, doesn't unlock anything. Provides +6 to clinch control when initiating grappling on the feet. I would say that this is both in ranked and online career modes an okay perk. It doesn't cost very much, it doesn't unlock anything for you in online career, but it's very cheap. And if you like to regularly initiate the clinch and to advance to single under or just try to hold people and put them on the cage, this will give you a noticeable boost to that. And given how cheap it is, it's fine. For ranked mode, it's fine as well. A lot of people like to use the clinch to secure takedowns, and this is a pretty useful perk for that purpose. Gives you basically a full star in clinch control. Nightmare requires 100 evolution points, requires 3 stars in all grappling attributes, and is required for 5-star submission offense. In ranked mode, I would say Nightmare is a good perk. In online career, I would say it's merely an okay perk. Extra submission defense from the bottom game, only for grappled defense, essentially means that this perk will boost your bottom game for the purpose of slowing down your opponent's transitions, but it won't speed up yours. Now, this is definitely very useful for people who like to be able to control things from the bottom. But it is a very expensive perk, 100 Evo points. And it only unlocks 5-star submission offense. You could probably get by with 4.5 unless you're just a pure submission specialist, in which case Nightmare might be a mandatory perk for you. For people who just want to use it for the purpose of the perk itself, I think it's just okay and maybe even on the bad side just because of the cost. It's definitely very useful, but you're using a perk slot and 100 Evo points for something that's just going to boost your defense from the bottom a little bit, when you're probably better off just putting a little more investment into bottom game. No Cigar requires 100 evolution points, 3 stars in all grappling attributes, and is required to unlock 5 stars for top game. No Cigar gives +6 to submission defense in a top position. Now, in ranked mode, I would say this is a bad perk, actually, because submission defense is less useful from the top position. You're not a lot of people getting submitted while on top in UFC 5, although it does happen. I wouldn't say it's worthless perk. I would say it's not quite an average perk. For online career mode, I would say this is an okay perk, but mainly just for grappling specialists. This is useful if you want to unlock 5 stars in top game. Having a high top game, really powerful for dominating on the ground. Very useful for that purpose. But otherwise, it's a very expensive perk at 100 attributes, and you're probably not going to need a bunch of extra submission defense while you're on top. Slam Boost. Slam Boost requires 50 evolution points, 3 stars in top game, and is required to unlock 5-star takedowns. In both ranked mode and online career, I think Slam Boost is a bad perk. One of the worst, in my view. It does 75% more damage on power takedowns. Things like anything that slams your opponent to the ground. So literally power singles and doubles, but also certain throws and trips. It's not that Slam Boost is a useless perk. Some of those takedowns do a decent chunk of damage to the body and a bit to the head as well. It's about the fact that you only have 5 perk slots, and if you're using one that's going to give you a little extra damage, at most maybe 1 or 2 times a round, how often are you slamming your opponent to the mat in UFC 5? Even if you do it a lot, we're talking maybe once a round. So I would say in general, that is not as useful as any other perk. In online career, if you want to max out your takedowns, I guess you can. I don't think you need max takedowns to get takedowns in UFC 5. Especially since clinching seems to be the preferred method to secure takedowns, and the takedown stat doesn't affect that. Slippery requires 10 Evo points. It requires no other attributes, and it is required for no other attributes. Slippery gives +6 to clinch control when denying, escaping, or countering. Basically when you're trying to resist being clinched. Slippery in ranked mode, I would say, is just an okay perk, maybe borderline bad. It's situational, but it does provide a nice little boost against those who like to clinch you, and that does come up. In online career mode, I would say it's, again, just okay, and the reason is that it's a very cheap perk. If you just need one more cheap perk to fill things out, and you don't like getting clinched, this will help you a little bit. But keep in mind that even boosting your clinch control is not going to make you immune to getting clinched. You still have to make the right decisions in the clinch. It's just a little more helpful, but I would say just okay, borderline below okay into bad. To Your Feet requires 20 Evo points, requires no other attributes, and does not unlock any attributes. To Your Feet provides +5 to takedown defense when using a get up from the ground. It's not going to make you harder to take down. It's just going to make it easier for you to get up to your feet from a bottom position. I would say that this is a good perk for both ranked and for online career. You're going to be taken down. That's something that's going to happen. And to be a little easier time getting up is pretty useful. For online career, this is a pretty cheap perk. Only 20 points. It makes it a good candidate if you need just one of your perks to be cheap. And you will be taken down. This will make your get-ups a little bit easier. I would say it's a very solid but unspectacular perk, which puts it in the good category for me. We start the health section of the perks with 2 barn burners. First off, Carved of Wood. Carved of Wood requires 100 evolution points. It also requires the Weathering Storms perk. As far as I know, the only perk that requires a different perk. It is required to get your body up to 5 stars. Carved of Wood gives +3 to head, body, and legs whenever those sections of your health have less health than your opponent does. It basically puts the brakes on. Whenever you're taking more damage than your opponent, you get a small but meaningful boost to your health attributes. Now this is, in ranked and online career mode, a very good perk, one of the best. Now, for most players, a 100-point perk is rarely going to be worth it. It's too expensive. Those points could be better spent on your attributes. However, it is important to keep in mind that you do have one essentially free selection. When you get to the end of your evolution point cap for your character at their current prestige, you can go over by as much as you want. So if you've got 10 points left, you can spend 100, go over by 90. So having one 100-point perk is a really good idea, but you want it to be the best 100-point perk for you. Carved of Wood is going to be the best perk for many people. Now, you do have to buy a suboptimal perk in Weathering Storms, but having extra health whenever you get hurt is always going to be valuable. This just makes you tanky, makes you durable, lets you walk through bullets. They roll off you. You play with them, right? It's a great perk, and very similar to our next one. Force of Nature requires 100 Evo points. It also requires all health attributes to be at 3 stars, and is required to get your blocking up to 5 stars. Force of Nature gives +3 to head, body, and legs when you have more health than your opponent. So this is like a companion piece to the prior perk, right? They just work in opposite ways. Carved of Wood, you get a health boost when you have less health. This one, you get a health boost when you have more health. This, like Carved of Wood, is a very good perk, both in ranked mode and in online career, for similar reasons. Which one you want depends on how you like to play. Now, Force of Nature has the benefit of being easy to acquire. All you require is 3-star health attributes. You don't have to buy an extra perk you might not want. So in a sense, it's cheaper. However, I would say for most players, Carved of Wood is a better perk, because when you've taken damage, that's when you want the health boost to kick in. Now, Force of Nature is very good for pressure fighters who like to hurt their opponent and then stick on them and take risks, right? You chip away at your opponent's health, you stay right in front of them, you don't back off for a second, and you just try to get them out of there. And if they hit you, you're less likely to get rocked. So it's definitely good for that style of play, but Carved of Wood is just good for any style of play, whereas Force of Nature sometimes is not going to do as much as it should if you play a more defensive style. So keep that in mind. They're both good perks. One's a little cheaper, but a little less good, but maybe well suited to you if your style matches it. Grinder requires 10 Evo points, 3-star clinch grapple stat, and is required for 5-star recovery. Grinder gives you +3 stamina whenever you're grappling on the feet, clinching. Grinder is, I would say, not a very good perk. I would say below average for both ranked and online career. And the only exception would be if you are a very, very dedicated clinch spammer, right? If you live in the clinch, then that 3 cardio may be noticeable. But for the most part, if you're using it just to get the occasional takedown or just to break up your opponent's action, you're not going to notice 3 cardio. It's a cheap perk, but it doesn't really do as much as other perks in the game. Higher Altitude requires 100 Evo points, requires all health attributes to be at 3 stars, and is not required to unlock any other attributes. Higher Altitude gives +3 cardio for strikes in rounds 3, 4, and 5. Believe it or not, this is a bad perk, at least in online career mode. In ranked, I would say it's just barely average. Now, this seems like a great perk, but there's a couple things working against it. For one thing, stamina is cheap in this game. Pretty much everybody's got great cardio. Secondly, Higher Altitude doesn't kick in until round 3, so for the first 2 rounds, you get no benefit. If there was a perk that gave you 100 extra cardio in round 5 only, it would also be worthless because the match is going to get decided usually in the first 2 rounds. It may not be finished in the first 2 rounds, but usually somebody will have built enough of a lead in the first 2 rounds, the other person's not going to overcome it. So getting that cardio at the end is just not as good as it sounds. Maybe if it was +6 cardio, it would maybe be worth it. Additionally, for online career, it's just too expensive. 100 Evo points, as I said, you can use one 100 Evo point perk without really costing yourself much. But if you're going to use it, I think there's just better expensive perks to add to your character. This actually is one of the worst, in my view. If you're a pure stamina addict, yeah, you can consider it, but I think there even is better stamina perks out there. Marathoner requires 100 Evo points, requires all striking to be at 3 stars, and is required to get cardio up to 5 stars. Marathoner essentially increases your cardio by 3 points when you throw a strike while moving. For ranked mode, this is barely an average perk. For online career, I would say this is another bad perk. Now, the plus side to it is that it is needed to get your cardio all the way up to 5 stars. But that is, to me, the only reason to get it. It's a 100-point perk, and you're getting essentially half a star of cardio only for striking while on the move, right? To take cardio up to 4.5 stars from 4 is 80 points. So this costs more than half a star, until you get to that 5th star point, and it only affects moving strikes. Now, you will throw a fair number of moving strikes, but it doesn't affect grappling. It doesn't affect any. You're affecting maybe 30% of your stamina output with this perk, and it's only half a star. It's just not an efficient perk for online career. Not efficient. Only get it if you must have your cardio at 5 stars. Out the gates requires 100 Evo points, requires your footwork to be at 4 stars, and is not required to unlock any perks. Out the gates increases your cardio by 3 during rounds 1 and 2, only for striking. Now, for ranked mode, I think this is about an average perk, right? This is, of these stamina perks, I would say the best, because it affects at least your striking, which might be 80%, might be 100% of your stamina output for 2 entire rounds, the most important rounds, the first 2. This makes it just naturally much better than higher altitude or marathoner because it affects a larger portion of your output in the important early rounds. For online career, honestly, I still think this is a bad perk. And there's a scenario where you would use it if you're at 4.5 stars in cardio and you don't want to buy marathoner because it costs 100 points to get the 5th star unlocked for cardio, which is another 100 points, but you do want a little more cardio, so you go for this one. Yeah, that's the only edge case where I would consider buying out the gates. It is the best of the cardio perks. In online career, it's still not worth it because it's too expensive. It's just too expensive, and it doesn't do quite enough. In ranked, like I said, decent. Recharger requires 100 Evo points, all health stats to be at 4 stars, and does not unlock anything. Recharger in ranked mode is an average perk, depending on your playstyle. If you're all about playing the long game and making a fight go 2, 3, 4 rounds, it can be pretty good because it's just going to give you more health if you make it to the end of the first round. If you're an all-out brawler trying to finish thing in the first or second round, it's going to be a mediocre or terrible perk. In online career, I categorize this as, I would say it's a below average perk because of the cost. 100 Evo points is a lot. There are better expensive perks out there, mainly carved wood and force of nature. And this doesn't unlock anything, which makes it not ideal. Wake Up Call requires 50 Evo points, requires Chin to be at 3 stars, and is required to get your recovery attribute up to 4 stars. In ranked mode, I would say this is just an average perk. It's not a huge bonus. It is nice to get up from stuns and knockdowns more quickly. That can definitely save your bacon. In online career, this technically I would consider almost a good perk, if only because it's required to unlock recovery. And not 5-star recovery, but 4-star recovery. So recovery is a pretty useful stat, though very expensive. If you want to get that over 3.5 stars, you have to have this perk. So for any player that likes to play a slightly longer game and wants more recovery, this perk becomes not quite mandatory, but highly recommended, even though the effects of the perk itself are a little underwhelming. Workhorse requires 100 Evo points, requires all your grappling stats to be at 3 stars, and is required for 5-star cardio. Note that this is the second perk that is required for 5-star cardio, along with Marathoner. Workhorse in ranked mode is a good perk, good to average, if you are a grappler, right? If you spend a lot of time on the ground, then having a small cardio boost is going to help you substantially, right? Cardio is very important in the ground game. For online career mode, this is a bad perk. And it comes back to cost. All of these cardio perks cost too much. The 5th star in cardio costs 100 Evo points. So there's no point in buying any of these cardio perks unless you want to go to 5-star cardio, which is going to require 2 100-point perks and an extra 100 points for that 5th star. Basically, all of these perks for cardio just aren't really worth it. You're better off just taking cardio up to 4.5 stars, which will be expensive, but will be cheaper than buying any of these perks, and then just not going for that 5th star. 4.5 stars of cardio is plenty, and you can spend your extra points on more chin, more defense, better supplemental striking stats, better ground game, etc. So this is a poor one in online career. Again, in ranked, where Evo points don't matter, I would say it's a solid perk. Here's a list of some of the perks I find to be most essential, especially for online career mode. Now, these are not mandatory perks. You can skip some of these, but I would strongly consider each and every perk I'm about to suggest if your archetype, striker, or grappler matches. Likewise, perks I don't list here aren't necessarily bad or not worth taking, but I would think about these perks first. Keep in mind, this is all one man's opinion, but I will say I'm the greatest genius in the world. I'm so intelligent, I can control the weather with my mind. Go ahead and look out your window. It just started raining. Enough people watch this video, somebody's going to be pretty impressed by that. For strikers, I think there's 4 perks that deserve your attention first and foremost. I wouldn't say you should take all of these, but I would take at least 2, and I'll explain why. Fast hands and laser focus are great perks for obvious reasons. They just make your boxing faster and more accurate. You don't have to take both of them. In fact, I think it's smart just to take one unless you're trying to max out punch speed and power. But think about the types of strikes you really try to land. Are you trying to get a little closer, landing hooks and uppercuts, which are the more damaging punches, or you fight a little more on the outside? You're more worried about your straight punches. Crazy legs is in there for kickers. Now, to be honest, kicking is not the most effective way to strike in UFC 5, but if you're going to be a kicker, you're going to mainly live on round kicks. I almost included frontal assault in here just because it's so cheap and only 20 Evo points, and front kicks can be very effective. But I think most of your kicking damage is going to come from roundhouse kicks. Predator is there not for the effects of the perk itself, but for what it unlocks. Predator is necessary to unlock 4 stars in punch power. If you're going to be a striker, you're almost going to certainly want more than 3.5 stars in punch power. Now, I'm a big fan of cutting down on some of your more expensive attributes in order to make yourself more well-rounded, but unless you're at Prestige 1, you're going to want more punch power, and you have to buy Predator for that. I find that perks are a little less important for grapplers than they are for strikers. Nevertheless, I think there are 3 that you should strongly consider. Again, not all 3, but look at each of these. The first is light glue. Light glue gives you a boost to clench grapple when you're initiating grappling, and it's a pretty big one, +6, and it only costs 10 Evo points. It's very cheap. It's not a massively impactful perk, but it gives you a solid way to initiate the clench to secure takedowns at minimal cost. No cigar is, again, not as useful for the perk itself, boosting your submission defense from a top position. Helpful, not essential. But it's necessary to get top game to 5 stars. If you're the type of fighter that likes to max out top game, and I think it does make sense to because it's really important for controlling the ground, then you have to get no cigar. On the other hand, if you are comfortable at 4 or 4.5 stars on top game, but you want a little extra boost for the cheap, Wrestle Clinic, I think, is one of the best perks for ground fighters. It gives you a +3 bonus to your top game, only for the purposes of denying transitions, not for advancing. And it only costs 20 Evo points. A very cheap way to get an extra half star of top game without having to make a big investment in no cigar and the Evo points to take top game to 5 stars. Finally, we have the all-around perks. Perks that should be strongly considered for any build. Now, once again, I wouldn't recommend you take all these perks. Obviously, you're not going to take 15 perks, but one of these is probably a good call for your build. We'll start with Bulldog. Now, Bulldog is a pretty good perk in and of itself, boosting your block strength while standing still or moving forward. But the real pull here is that Bulldog unlocks 4-star chin for your fighter. Chin is one of the most important stats for any fighter. Obviously, for strikers, it's invaluable, but even for grapplers, it's pretty useful because you're probably going to want to be able to take some shots on the jaw while you're walking your opponent down to pull him down to the mat. So Bulldog improves block and chin strength, universally good for any build. Carved of Wood and Force of Nature are both excellent candidates for your big expensive perk. Both increase all your health attributes. Again, obviously great for strikers, but also useful for grapplers who will have to take some shots here and there. I definitely would not recommend taking both, right? That's overkill. It's better just to put more points into your health attributes. But Carved of Wood is good for anybody, but it does require you to get Weathering Storms as well. Force of Nature is a little cheaper, but a little less effective, but more well suited to the pressure roll. Wake Up Call is a so-so perk in and of itself, right? It's nice to have some extra recovery when you get hurt. That will save you from taking some knockouts. But the big thing here is that it unlocks 4 stars in recovery. Not everybody will need to go to 4 stars in recovery. Again, if you're all or nothing in the first round, recovery is not going to matter as much to you. But if you like to take things a little slower, if you go for the long game, then you're going to want at least 4 stars in recovery, if not more, at which point Wake Up Call becomes a very attractive option. The EA UFC series is largely iterative. Most titles are not that different from the prior one. Big surprise, it's EA. But 4 was just a slight tweak on 3, 5 is a tweak on 4. And I think one area where this approach has really let down in 5 is the perk system. While perks were changed from 4 to 3, they are identical in 5 as they were in 4. And to be honest, I find the perk system to be kind of lacking. The issue is that it doesn't provide very much depth, while it does provide a fair deal of complexity. To make a rough and ready definition of depth versus complexity, I'll phrase it like this. I think depth is when your choices have a significant impact on how the game plays. Complexity is when you have a lot of choices. Game can be complex and deep, game can be deep but not complex, or complex but not deep. I think most people would agree that complex but not deep is not the way you want to go. And that's where the perk system leaves us in UFC 5. There are over 30 choices for perks, and you have up to 5 slots, leading to potentially thousands or tens of thousands of possible combinations. However, none of the perks feel very meaningful. All of them give you a small bonus, usually about half a star worth, to one attribute under a certain set of circumstances. The few perks that don't work like this are not very impactful either. As a result, we get into a situation where perks don't seem to change the way your fighter plays in a significant way. But for online career, it's very complex how you go about actually applying the perks to get the attributes that you want. Let me give you an example. Let's say you want to upgrade your punch power to 5 stars. You take it up to 3.5 and you find, oops, I need a perk. So you head over to the perks page. Look up Predator. In order to unlock your punch power, sure enough, it requires an attribute of its own, 3-star footwork. Okay, no big deal. We go back, we upgrade our footwork all the way up to 3 stars. Now we can buy Predator, so we can buy more punch power. Take our punch power up to 4.5 stars, and now we need another perk, laser focus. So we go back to get laser focus, and sure enough, laser focus has a requirement. We need to get our jab and our straight up to 4 stars. I mean, that's not a huge problem. We probably want to be throwing some jabs and straights with our powerful punches, but it does take a while, and it also requires us to level up the baseline jab and straight, not one of the variants that we can unlock. All this because we wanted to hit hard. Are we having fun here? Is this deep and engaging way to build our fighter? I would argue it's not. I would argue this is just a bunch of hoops we have to go through, so we can't just get what we want. That's the complexity issue. But here's the other side of it. Perks are just not very meaningful choices in the game. All of these perks have minor effects at most. They give you a small bonus. Let's take out the gates. Should be one of the more interesting perks. Gives you a small bonus plus 3 to cardio for striking only in the first 2 rounds. After that, nothing. Now, I would wager a guess that for every fighter that has this, you could remove the perk, give them plus 1 or 2 to cardio, and you would notice absolutely no difference. You know who doesn't have out the gates, who probably should? Conor McGregor. If you look at Conor McGregor and think about the way he fights, I think it's instructive for how out the gates would work if I were making it. Conor McGregor starts every fight like a man on fire. He charges at his opponents, he pressures them heavily with kicks and left hands, and about as often as not, he finishes them in the first round. If the fight goes on from that point, at some point in the second or the third round, he runs out of juice. He stops fighting as effectively, sometimes he looks actively gassed and out of it. How should such a fighter behave? In the game, you can't give them high cardio, because then, of course, they'll just sustain the attack for 5 rounds. Low cardio doesn't quite feel right either, right? They should be very high cardio in the first round and much less afterwards. Here's how I do it. I would make out the gates give a big bonus to cardio in round 1 only, say +5 or 6. I would then make out the gates have a drawback. Starting in round 3, you'd get a pretty big malus to cardio, say -5 or 6 on its own. Such a fighter would be hell to deal with in the first round, average in the second, and from the third on would be very prone to gassing out and getting finished. There's an interesting perk. If there is a utility to the perk system for UFC 5, I think it's this. It basically just helps you identify what a fighter is good at and how they're supposed to be used. Let's take a fighter who's not quite a house name, Chris Curtis. Good, solid fighter. A lot of fans probably know him, but some don't. What is Chris Curtis good at? Well, let's just look at the perks and see if that tells us something. Chris Curtis has fast hands, so we want to be throwing round punches and uppercuts. Okay. Chris Curtis has bulldog, so he blocks well when he's standing still or moving forward. He has predator, so he moves a little faster when he's moving forward. He has pay to miss, so he is good at dodging punches while his feet are planted. Recharger helps him recover health, so he's probably pretty solid in a longer fight. Based on all that, you'd probably think the way you want to use Chris Curtis is to move forward, pressure your opponent, get in close, blocking punches and slipping them as is needed, and then to throw punches to the head and body, hooks and uppercuts. And sure enough, that is how you're supposed to use Chris Curtis. You look at his stats, he's got a rock head, he's got solid punch speed and power, he's not the fastest, not the best at taking leg kicks, but he's very good at slipping and dodging and blocking his way onto the inside where he can counter with some of his high-level body punches. There you go. That's what a perk system is good for in this game. Not at making fighters really play differently, but at least giving you a shorthand in case you don't want to go through all the stats and all the move levels to see exactly how they're used. And that's something. It's not useless. It just could be a lot better. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. I'm currently working on a video on move levels, and after that, I'd like to put together a basic guide on the fundamentals of striking defense as I see it. Hopefully those will not take quite so long as this last one did. I was just distracted by work. As you may or probably do not know, I am a professional criminal, and I'm currently pulling off an elaborate heist, and the lead detective who's been investigating me is closing in. We even had a tense face-to-face discussion where he informed me that he was going to take me down, although I must admit, I do feel that despite our differing worldviews, that we're not actually so different, he and I. But I think I'm just going to give him the slip, and I don't think I'm going to see him again, and I don't think I'll have any showdowns with him in the future. So I should be free to get my work done on these videos much quicker. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like and a subscribe. If you did not enjoy the video, leave a comment calling me the world's biggest dumbass, and that will also be fine.